Okay, this video tonight is going to be a little bit different. If you tune in normally to hear me throw opinions around about real life stuff, then you might want to get into your underwhelmed position before you watch this next piece. And if you're a Q junkie, I'm going to offer up a dialogue that isn't anything I've seen posted online by anyone else. It's a little bit of a detour off the main street into Wackadoo Boulevard. And we're going to go back and talk about some old Q drops from way back in October. Stuff that falls into that category of Q's one-liner that it would put 98% of the population in the hospital. Now, I kind of expected someone else to post this because the Q crowd, it seems to draw another group of enthusiasts, an overlap of the secret space program / alien visitor sci-fi enthusiasts. And that was one of the first things that popped into my mind in those early posts, but nothing happened. So I guess all my counterparts have been properly abducted and they aren't around to show you what I'm going to show you. And so now I'm going to start this off by reminding you I am not making any claims. In this video I'm just showing you some resources and then throwing out a few suggestions. But we are going to go into the world of wackadoo, so you're just going to have to decide for yourself where you want to brush the static off. So first, I'm going to go back and I'm going to show you some drops that Q stated several months ago. Now back in late October, early November, Q posts kept referring to Alice and Wonderland. And sometime around mid-November, the reference stopped after what appeared to be a correlation to Hillary Clinton and the Bloody Wonderland. Then it appeared that the reference is satisfied when someone posts a link to a parody-like Amazon book titled Hillary Clinton in Wonderland. Includes quotes from the campaign trail. And so Q says in a post, finally, correct reference, Saudi Arabia, the Bloody Wonderland equals Alice and Wonderland signatures. Study important Q. Now if you look inside at the preview, there's nothing remarkable. The book appears to be just a copy of the original Alice in Wonderland with Hillary's name replacing Alice's. And we do see chapter titles that have been altered. And it's interesting that we see a reference to Queen Winfrey. This is published several weeks before Oprah made her way into the political news. So that's interesting. And the only signatures are those of Sir John Tenniel. That's the original illustrator. There's nothing remarkable. And the book is priced at about 158 rupees. That's $2-ish. And it's listed in India. So you have to have an account registered in India to buy this book. Now over at Reddit, someone claims to have bought the book and that there's nothing more than just the rest of the story with a list of 240 Clinton quotes in the back of the book. And this is where I stop looking at this. So I'm just taking a leap and I'm assuming that the game master doesn't really want you to buy the book because they've thrown in a purchase hurdle at this level of the game that we're playing. So remember, this game has basically been set to all players. So right now, our Q seems to be doing better over on Teespring than on Amazon Self-Publishing. So if you need this book, you can get to it. It's not impossible, but you're going to have to go do that on your own. But I don't really see anything here. And if something occurs to us, we can always come back to it. So there are over 20 posts with Alice and Wonderland, and that was it. So what else is out there about Alice in Wonderland? Well, there is a reference that sort of fits from the DIA in a publication that's been removed from the internet, but you can still get at it at the Wayback Machine, titled Intelligence Science Board, Study on Educing Information. So interrogating and information extraction. And this is a collection of reports, and in report number 5, titled Kubark, Counterintelligence Interrogation, Review, Observations of an Interrogator, Lessons Learned and Avenues for Further Research by Stephen M. Kleinman, MS, in February of 2006. We learn that Alice in Wonderland is the power of applied confusion. The aim of the Alice in Wonderland, or confusion technique, is to confound the expectations and conditioned reactions of the interrogatee. He is accustomed to a world that makes sense, at least to him, a world of continuity and logic, a predictable world. He clings to this world to reinforce his identity and powers of resistance. The confusion technique is designed not only to obliterate the familiar, but to replace it with the weird. As the process continues, day after day as necessary, the subject begins to try to make sense of the situation, which becomes mentally intolerable, and he is likely to make significant admissions, or even pour out his story. So when Q says Q equals Alice, and later Hillary equals Alice, is Q telling us who is responsible for applying confusion or disinformation in a particular narrative? Many of the posts, as you can see, are just lists of points to follow and then marked Alice and Wonderland. Are these just markers notifying us that there's some kind of psyop meant to confuse us in each of the lists? Evidently, Alice in Wonderland is an intelligence community technique of applied confusion, and it's used as late as 2006, according to the documents at the DIA. So maybe this is what Q was telling us, and then when no one else was picking up on this, they ended it with that unsatisfying Hillary book. But there's another detail that's lingering that we can't walk away from just yet. Before Alice, there was another post, something else. Back on October 29th, we see this post that starts with projection. And then it has a list of these Socratean type questions that talk about the Democrats. Democrats can't lose control over the black population. Democrats form the Confederate States against freeing slaves. Democrats form the KKK. HRC's mentor is who? And we follow it down to the phrase, through the looking glass. And then it continues with, they rely on the MSM to keep the narrative going, but tech is entrenching on their controls. Now, does tech mean that people like us on the internet are so pervasive that we're interrupting the MSM's controls? Or does it mean that there's actually some kind of a technology that's competing with the MSM controls? It ends with, this will fail. Anyhow, this seems to be our first Alice reference right here. Projection, through the looking glass. Now I'm going to take you back about 15 years. And 15 years ago was when all the best alien UFO whistleblowers were out there because everybody's story was still fresh and new. And one of these guys went by the name of Dan Burish. And Dan had a doozy of a story. Some might even say it was the best. So this guy took a lot of heat and he went through waves of being called all sorts of names. And as the years went on, it looked to me like his wife and he were playing some sort of an elaborate role-playing game. Everything was really dramatic and their science was mixed with some questionable techniques. And it was actually quite exhausting to follow these guys over the years. But Dan had been banging around with a story and a book for a while before he found an audience on Project Camelot. And there he told us about his work as a secret underground government microbiologist who had a bromance with a captive alien, which was actually a human from multiple thousand years into the future, but it got stuck in our timeline. And I won't get into the whole thing, but if you want, you can go listen to him breathe heavy and sigh through it over at Project Camelot. But during those interviews, he made some claims. And one of those claims was his witness to a working Stargate with what he called looking glass technology. And he describes a Stargate as having multiple functions different from what you and I would recognize from TV and movies that we've seen over the years. And one of these technologies was a way to see future events. He describes this large, elaborate technical device that includes an argon-powered laser, and it reflects light into a mirror, and there are these bands of electromagnets fired up, and they engage somehow, and it creates a green cloud with a 3D image that's projected, and it'll show future events and possible timelines. And whoever the person is who controls this device is able to watch future events and get a head start on becoming a power lord or whatever their life goals are. And he goes on to say that there are a handful of these devices built, and the elites of the world are using them to play out scenarios to guarantee their own power. And at one point he talks about Hillary Clinton becoming president in the future, but again, this was 2005, and although no one would have any way to know that she would run for president at that time, that was still a thing that people were loosely throwing around, so it's not completely out there. Now, according to Dan, this device was located in a room on level 4 of the S4 facility at Groom Lake, previously known as Area 51. And this was known as the Alice floor. And per Dan's comments, permanently wired above the entrance to the Project Looking Glass laboratory, there was a 3-foot-tall statue of a white rabbit. And this rabbit was described as having a clock in his hand and wearing a royal maroon vest with gold fringes and black buttons. And it should be noted that every time Carrie Cassidy refers to the devices showing the future, he corrects her and he says possible futures. So the machine, it's showing a probability, and it's showing the most likely outcomes. And these outcomes have a variability that can change. And this is an important distinction because basically he's describing what sounds like a computer offering a predictive model. And computers, they do this all the time by compiling information and offering the probability of certain results. And that's not magic in any way, but it's really hard work, and it requires a total of 0 aliens to get it done. However, the input for calculating probability is only as limited as the information that you can program into it. And of course, how would a computer process such a massive amount of information to predict things like the future of a planet? Remember, this story was being told in 2005, and people are still pretty resentful about Windows XP at this point. So, as far as anything known to the public domain, this really appears to be fiction. Now, this guy goes on to describe more technology in detail, and he seems friendly and agreeable with a handful of other old-timers who were active whistleblowers about the same time at similar facilities with their credentials. And eventually he moved into making other claims, one more incredible than the next, and after a while it seemed to become just too much even for the most willing alien-loving audience. And so this story might have been archived in the category of great whistleblower fiction. But, as you would guess, something popped up on the internet. It was a documentation from Los Alamos Laboratories in the form of an archived technical report titled Through the Looking Glass with Phase Conjugation. And it becomes curiouser and curiouser when we see this report with 4 pencil-drawn images in full color in equal quadrants on the cover. And in the top left image, we see the back of Alice as she looks in a mirror, and the reflection shows not her face but a duplicate of her back. And in the second quadrant, we see a cat, and the reflection shows a very close detail of the cat's eye. And in the third quadrant, the white rabbit touches his straight ear with his left arm, and in the reflection, the rabbit touches the same ear, but it's bent instead of straight. And in the final quadrant, we see a young Alice holding a clock, while the mirror reflects an old Alice holding a clock. The report starts by telling us, imagine a mirror that reflects more light than was incident, that reflects a beam into the same direction regardless of the mirror's tilt, that eliminates image distortions by causing light rays to retrace their paths as if running backward in time, and that when looked at allows the observer to see absolutely nothing. Science fiction, you say? Well, such mirrors have been the subject of intense investigation both here at Los Alamos and at other research laboratories around the world. Not only do they exist, but their practical applications may be far-reaching. A caption describes the images by saying, at left, a whimsical look at 4 aspects of phase conjugate reflection. These are clockwise from upper left, backward traveling wavefronts, light returning to its point of origin, time reversal, and a restoration of beam quality. So there's something called looking glass, and it uses mirrors. The report describes argon, among other gases, that has characteristics similar to Dan's claims. And the technical details of the report continue, and it ends with the sentence, much remains to be explored in this intriguing wonderland. Now, this article was written in 1982. Now, when I go and I look for some kind of practical application in the world that involves mirrors and phase conjugation, I find that this seems to be used most prominently in holograph technology. Evidently, phase conjugation science allows a laser to read a 2D image and reflect the light back as a 3D image, and it can create holograms that are currently being developed for VR reality games. And this is only one of among several applications that are being used for this type of light distortion. Now, this also corresponds with Dan Burrish's claims that a 3D image would be projected. Now, at this point, I have no idea why light itself would reflect an event from a different time, as stated as a possibility in the paper at Los Alamos Laboratories, but we certainly are in a different computer age from 2005. Now, within the last decade, something else has been described as a reality to us in computer processing, and that is the D-Wave quantum computer. And what quantum computing does is, instead of taking the processing time that we recognize needed to process a program, quantum computing takes information and it can process it simultaneously. Now, we have no idea how far this has come because information of the D-Wave computer is still a bit elusive to us, but we do know that Google claims to have some of these computers in its possession, among a few other places on the planet. But unlike anyone else, Google has a database that it's been compiling for the last 15 years that includes information on just about everything. And of course, that would make for some very powerful predictive modeling. So sometime during the beginning to middle of November, Q alludes to the fact that our previous president and Eric Schmidt, the head of Google, are meeting in a clandestine method in North Korea. And we don't really know why, but is it possible that they could be working together to create a strategy that includes quantum computing and predictive modeling to combat the unexpected power loss that they've experienced the previous year? Of course, that's just a guess. Of course, that could be just a guess. And these ends all seem to be left loose up until January 19th, when Q posts a series of images, all very interesting, but not exactly consecutive and having anything to do with one another. One image seems to go largely ignored. The image appears to be Barack Obama giving a speech. And in the photo, it also appears that George Soros is sitting down on the right-hand side, gazing at the back of Barack Obama. And no one seems to have mentioned this photo to any capacity, except for the fact that, to me, I don't see Barack Obama in this picture. I see what appears to be a hologram. The first thing that we notice is the glass pane through which the image is being taken. Secondly, we see somewhat of an unusual shadow direction at the bottom of his shoes, which appears to have some sort of a colorful light refraction. And third, not only is he not facing his audience, but the audience seems to be looking at a different focal point depending on where each individual is standing. Now, based on the Los Alamos report, it states that light returns a straight path regardless of the tilt of the mirror. So each individual's point of focus would be slightly different depending on where they're standing, because the light is being returned directly to them and not at an angle. If I were to guess what's happening in this picture, I wouldn't say that the people who are gathered here are here to watch the former president speak. I would guess that the people here are watching a demonstration of technology where a very lifelike hologram has just made its way down a staircase and they're marveling over what it is that they're looking at. And this image doesn't seem to really tie into anything or have anything to do with the current events immediately in the news, but it may tie back to one of the original posts that stated projection through the looking glass. And we might have a resource of why we're following the white rabbit. So despite the fact that the news is very exciting at the moment, I have a sense that we're going to be looking at an amazing burst of technology that's going to be coming into the public domain, and that this is something else we need to be keeping our eye on, because if whistleblowers have been around for the last 15 years telling sensationalized stories with descriptions of real-life technology woven into the linings of their stories, then we might want to go back and start revisiting some of those more fun mythologies that we enjoyed over the years. And 2018 is going to be a lot of fun.